I wanted you to tell us some about how, when you were growing up here, like if you wanted to go to Eastman or Dublin, how would you get there before cars?
Before cars.
Or
Well,
how your mother and them got there before
yeah.
cars?
Well, cars were somewhat available when I was a little girl. I remember that our first car was kind of like a Model T, but it had 4 doors, and it had snap-in windows, like was on the front of oil stoves and things. It wasn't glass; it was some kind of plastic. And they we had one that we drove around in, and we also I remember when we moved from out here on the farm in a tenant house into Eastman, and we would go in the car when we went, but Mama never drove until after Daddy died, so we would always have to wait for him to come and take us where we were going, and he'd stand around on the street and talk. But Mama's traveling when she was a young woman and went to teach school and went off to school. She had to go on the train, and there was a depot in Chester and also a hotel
In
where
Chester?
people came. It was a 2-story hotel, I understand. I never saw it, but they talked about it. And they would go and catch the train and go to different places and spend the day and go swimming and have picnics. And Mama, when she started teaching, would go off to her teaching place and on the train.
Okay.
Yeah, and they would talk about the conductors and
So
stuff.
every little town had a train?
And they had a train that
Station.
went from one kind of good sized place, like from Hawkinsville to Sandersville, and that one came through Greston and Chester and Dublin and so forth.
And
So it would get and there and turn around and come back. I don't know remember
Yeah.
anything about the
Didn't Plainfield have a
Yes,
train?
Plainfield had a train that.
And they had a
What is it?
hotel too, didn't they?
Yeah.
There across from the barber shop, wasn't that an
Yeah,
old hotel?
yeah. And there was a big place dug in the road where they to keep the train as level as they could, if you remember.
Yeah.
I
can see it.
guess it's still there
Yeah, yeah.
where the train ran through.
I mean, that's odd because, you talked about that you lived in a tenant house. Did y'all have electricity and
No.
no electricity
No
and
electricity.
no running water?
No.
Where did y'all get the running water from? A well or?
Yeah, there was water in a well, and it was fixed with they called it a shallow well pump, and it pumped it up to through a pipe on the back porch, and you
Oh.
had to go out on the porch to get the water. I don't know why they didn't put it in the house.
Yeah, pump
Well,
it
they
up.
didn't have a sink in the house. Maybe that,
Yeah.
an idea came later on
Yeah, yeah.
to have sinks. When they first built this house, well, it was when they remodeled it, they put a lavatory in every room because they had a washstand stand in there with a bowl and pitcher where water was carried to every bedroom, and they followed through with
Putting the
that and
sink
had
in
a
the bedroom.
lavatory in every room.
Who built those tenant houses? Like, how did, I remember there was a Cedar house and Jack's house, and did the people that lived in them build them?
No, some of the Grandpa Burch hired somebody to build them. Some of them were nice houses that would have 4 and 5 rooms, and some of them just had 2 rooms, like a large room to live in, and another room for the kitchen and dining room.
And so why did they build them? Did they build them to get people to come work on the farm?
Yeah, that they worked on the farm. They
And got free rent? Or?
every end of the year when they finished the crop, the farmers would go out and try to find somebody to come move in their houses that they had, or the tenant farmers would go around and try to find somebody that would take them on in the place, and they would pack up everything and move to a new place.
And were they usually black, or were most white people too?
They were mostly all black, but there were white people
That did tenant farming. And how did that work? How did tenant farming work? Do you know?
They got half of. Daddy would furnish the seed and the fertilizer and the equipment, and meaning the horses and the plows and wagons and all of that stuff, and he would also. They had an account where they could get so much money, or what they thought they needed
Before the crop came in.
For their groceries and the doctors and things like that. And then when the crop came in and they decided what they made, they either got money or they owed him money. So they would stay on another year and try to work it out so that they could come out even. And sometimes they made money, and it was just the way it was, like it is now.
Did you get to know the people that lived in the different tenant houses when you were a girl?
Yeah,
Did you play with the children?
Yeah, we played baseball and did things, and they did work at the house. They would. We didn't have grass on the yards like we have now because the chickens and everything were out, and we swept the yards. We got gallberry bushes, which was a bushy shrub, and you would beat it on a fence, like a wire fence, and get most of the leaves off of it, and then it left a kind of thin, brushy end, thin sticks, and you swept the yard with it. You took scraps from the house and wrapped it around the sticks together and held it and made a broom. We call them yard brooms.
So y'all made them yourself?
Yeah.
And kept it. So how often did you do that? Sweep the yard?
Sweep the yards
Like
every Friday.
Every Friday. Oh my
We
God.
cleaned up for the weekend. That sounded so southern when I said every Friday.
So did you ever go to these tenant houses and spend the night or anything?
No.
Or it was definitely just a...
Just to visit, play. Would go, maybe go to the houses. The people that lived down where on the road where the lake is, on that road, the school bus went right by their house, and when it was really, really cold, we would go in their house and stand by the fire,
and wait.
And somebody would listen for the school bus, and then we'd all go out. All the tenant children and us would go out and get on the bus when it came by.
Okay. Did the black tenant children go to school? Did they have public school buses?
Yeah, they had public schools, but they had to walk to school. They didn't have
They didn't have buses for them?
No, they didn't have buses for them. They didn't have the privileges that we had. That was what all that thing about equal schools for blacks and whites.
You mean if they lived out here, they had to walk to Chester?
They walked to Chester, or they walked over here in the up that road going to Plainfield. You know where we used to go.
By Brett Jones's.
We used to go. They walked over there, or they walked to Chester. And our school bus drivers would see them. We would pass sometimes when they were walking, and he would stop and pick them up because most everybody was off the bus, and he would bring them as far as they went. There was a lot of sympathy for them, and yet there was a lot of people that didn't understand where they were.
Were they required to go to school?
No.
They weren't. They didn't have to go to school.
I don't remember the people that I went to school with, but us being required to go either, because so many of them stayed out and helped with the farming and the gathering of the farms. I don't remember.
So that's a later thing that you had to go.
That you had to go.
So even when they were little, they could just stay home and work, or the parents probably sent them until they were old enough to work.
Most of the parents were interested in them. I would think most of the poor parents were interested in the children going to school.
And doing better.
And doing better, more so than they are now with some of the
Well,
students.
did you always know you were going to go to college?
Yeah, I always knew I was going to college. My daddy had been to business school and become an accountant, and my mother had been to school in Milledgeville. It was called GSCW, Georgia State Women's College, I guess. Whatever.
Georgia College for Women.
And she taught school, and Daddy worked in the bank as an accountant, and then he worked at the gin in the cotton ginning season and worked there. So they always talked about school and going to school and that, and we just knew that we were going to go to school.
Now, did you always know you were going to Berry, or did
No,
you?
I decided when I was in the 4th grade that I was going to Berry because there was in the back of our geography book, it had a little write-up about Berry and some of the pictures that were there and about Miss Berry, and there were some teachers in our school that had been there.
Okay.
And that was where I wanted to go. And then when I got to be in high school and had home economics, I knew that's what I wanted to major in, and so it was just all settled in my mind.
And that's unusual.
Yeah.
Now, to have the have it all figured out. Okay, stop it for a second. Okay, can you tell us something about Nanny and Papa Burch and how they met and where they got married, or about their wedding, or what that was like?
Mama and Daddy both had lived in the Chester community. Was Grandpa Burch came here when he was about 21 years old and settled on the farm and built up the farm. And he came with his wife, and so Daddy was born here on the farm. But Mama's father came from someplace in North Carolina. There was this peach packing company there, and they sent him as the supervisor to come to the area around Chester and plant peach trees and tend them and harvest them. And I guess they were shipped out on the train. I don't know how they were shipped, or they were carried on trucks. And he married after he came here. Her name was Spellas. It was, I don't know much about any of the ones in her family except the aunts and uncles that she had. Her health wasn't good, and she died with anemia when she was in her 50s. And of course they married, and then they had built a house in Chester. He had 4 children, and he had built a house in Chester, and that's where they were living. And the peach crop just began not to produce as much for some reason. I think they had some late cold winters, and they lost their crops, and they just discontinued it. The life of a peach tree is about 7 or 8 years that it produces. It's not a strong tree. For whatever reason, they discontinued the peach business, and they sold their house and found a farm in Adrian, Georgia, which is on the other side of Dublin, and moved there and started farming. And Mama was the oldest child, and she had gone to school at GSCW.
So he did pretty good with his farming.
He did, and she started teaching school, and she was dating Daddy, and he had a car, and would come to see her, and some of his friends would come with her, because it's a pretty little trip down from Chester to Adrian.
And so like when people would date, they would just come sit together in their house?
In the house.
And talk?
And they would talk about they so and so was planning to get married, and they hadn't even kissed because they hadn't had an opportunity.
Because they were always meeting in front of the parents.
Yeah. Well, anyway, they married, and a few days after Christmas, I don't remember the date now, and they went to Savannah on their honeymoon, but they got on the train in Adrian and went to Savannah for their honeymoon, and came back to Chester to live because Daddy was an accountant in the bank there in Chester, and he already had a house, and he had already bought furniture. He had bought furniture from somebody that was selling out, and it was kind of real old. He bought, they had a sewing machine that he bought and a lot of stuff, and so they lived in this house, and in October the 18th, they had their first child.
Oh, and that was Uncle Tommy.
Uncle Tommy. And I was born on November the 2nd the next year. So they started having some for a while.
Goodness. What was I going to ask you? The Burches seem to be pretty prominent in Chester. I mean, DA was Daniel Augustus was the president of the bank,
Mm-hmm.
and then his daughter married the doctor, and then didn't Uncle Ben own this cotton gin, or did he just work there?
He just worked there.
Oh, okay.
Grandpa Burch was successful with his farm and kept buying land. He added on to the house and fixed it very well for a house out in the country, and had a bathroom and running water and an artesian well, and had that's what they called them then.
What's an artesian well?
Well, it's a well where they go down into the ground, like we have now.
Oh, okay.
It was just a name they had for them. And he had 12 children that grew to be adults. They lost one daughter. And he gave all of the children a farm and so much money, and that was a lot of children. That the oldest daughter married Doc Lister, and that is the family that Jake and Stu and all of those come from, and he gave them that land down in there. He gave Uncle Harlow, who was Daddy's brother, the land next to him where Stu lives now. Okay. And Daddy had the land next to that, which was just across the road. And he had some land up around north of Chester, and he gave a farm to Uncle Jack up there. But they were all scattered around the different farms, and I don't know how many acres was in, but I think around 80 acres was in each farm. And so he was rather prominent.
Yeah. Was there any other families in Chester that were prominent during that time that you remember?
Well, there was a Nicholson family that was on the side of Chester next to Yonkers and Empire, and they sent their sons to military, Citydale. Okay. They had 2 sons, and I remember them sending them to the Citydale, and I thought they must be well off. It was Dr. Massey and his family was well off. And there was more than one of the Nicholsons in the family, and they seemed to have money. And the Winds, which was their daughter, they only had one daughter that lived, and she married George Bowen. That was he came here as a school teacher from North Georgia, and boarded in the house with the Winds and married their daughter. And they had lots of land and a big house. Okay. So those were about the only ones that I knew. He came here and stayed and worked for $1 a day in the field because he couldn't find a job in South Carolina. It's kind of like it is now, you know. Yeah. Nobody's working for $1 a day, but they're all out looking for a job.
Now, Uncle Marvin, he went to college, didn't he?
Mm-mm.
No, he didn't.
I don't know
he
if
had a
he
good
even-
job, didn't he? What did he do?
What did he do? I think he just always sold insurance.
Oh, did he? Because
Yeah.
they had a nice house, and
Yeah.
Abigail went to...
And he was always mad and grouching and complaining about people. I think it came from Mama and her mother.
Were that way.
Uh-huh.
And was her mother was
Her
died
mother
young,
was always sick.
always sick, and then Nanny Burch was always, and then
They always
Joyce
sick.
was always sick.
And Aunt Edna was always sick.
Sick.
They were a whole
Sort of
bunch
like a pattern that
Uh-huh.
being unhappy and complaining and being a grouch. Now, it was Edna, Aunt Edna, Nanny, and Uncle
Joyce.
Marvin.
Yeah, and Uncle
Yeah,
Marvin.
yeah.
And Carson, we called him Uncle Bud. And he was after Mama. And he died when he was 42 with a ulcer in his stomach. And
Wasn't he
just
wasn't he
didn't
an
have-
alcoholic? Was he the one that was an alcoholic?
No, it was Uncle Marvin started off being an alcoholic, but he married Aunt Evelyn and she got him straightened out. Or he
Ah.
straightened himself out.
Who was the one that was an alcoholic that died young?
It was Uncle Harlow, Daddy's brother.
Dad, okay.
And Uncle Jack was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Jackie Rose's
Daddy. And he died young too, didn't he?
Yeah, he was a diabetic. He died,
Died
you know.
young. Well, what do you remember about doctors and medicine and like if you had to, did the doctors come to the house? Didn't they doctor come to the house
Uh-huh.
back then to people's houses? I can almost remember Dr. Massey coming
Yeah,
to
he
our
come
house.
out. Uh-huh, he
They would do
did.
house calls.
I think it was
In our
because we lived
lifetime.
out in the country and we were family that,
Yeah.
you know, we would call him and he would.
But earlier that was very common, wasn't it, for the doctor
very
to
common.
go?
He came to the house most of the time because the patients didn't have a way to get there. And Dr. Massey owned a motorcycle that
Oh,
he
did?
made house calls on.
Well, how would they get word to him that somebody was sick and they needed him
Somebody would call him up or somebody would come and tell him that
to go to a certain
go on
place?
something. Maybe they would ride a mule or horse.
And did he have very limited medicine? Did he have a lot of different kinds in his bag, or?
Well, he had a high ceiling in his office, about, I guess it was about as high as this one. I think this one's 9 or 10 feet. And had bottles up there. We had great big brown bottles up there with liquid medicine in it. And he poured in bottles and fixed it and
Mix it up.
mixed it up and handed it to
And
him.
that's what he learned in college, was how to
Uh-huh.
mix up certain...
He went to Atlanta to medical school. I don't know if it was Emory or where it was.
Well, what sort of things now that you just can go to the drugstore and get something and take and you're okay, did people actually die of back then? Do you remember any, the medicine was so poor that they couldn't?
Just about everybody that got pneumonia died in the
Pneumonia.
winter.
Okay.
From their respiratory system because they didn't have penicillin or any of those things to
So-
cure antibiotics and you know, like we have all
So,
these antibiotics
if you had
now.
a bad cold, it could get turned real serious.
Yeah, and they died within a few days. The winter that Dr. Massey's daddy died and Mama's daddy died, and there was another family that had a young boy that was in high school over there close to Middle Ground, died. They just all died within a few days of each other. They all had pneumonia.
And didn't you say diarrhea could turn
Yeah,
real?
diarrhea killed the babies.
Because they
Just
couldn't
something-
stop it. They couldn't get it under control. What about staph infections and that type of thing? Did they have
I
a way
don't
to
think
stop?
we knew about rhisons, we call them,
Yeah.
that big. But I don't remember anybody dying
From
of
rhisons.
a staph infection.
And measles and mumps, you pretty much
Just had 'em.
You just had them and got through it. Okay. Did you ever go to the hospital when you were young?
No, that I went and had my tonsils taken
Get
out.
out. And
When
how
I
did,
was in the 2nd grade
how did they put you to sleep?
with ether.
Okay. All right. And did you stay in the hospital very long?
Just one day, one night.
Okay, so even back then it was. Well, what about having a baby? How did you?
They had them at home.
Okay, they had them at home.
Uh-huh.
And then what about you when you had your babies? I know you were in the hospital.
Yeah, I was in the hospital.
And
Mama had C-section later on, and went to the hospital.
Okay. Because she was losing her babies, wasn't she?
They decided later that it was the RH factor they didn't know about when she lost.
And didn't
those two
Joyce
babies.
lose her first baby with the RH factor? And then they found out how to protect her.
How to treat it.
Well, when you went, how long did you stay in the hospital after you had a baby?
It seemed like I stayed forever. I'm sure it
I know they
was
did.
4 or 5 days.
I know it did, because now they go in, have the baby in their home the next morning, you know, and I know that you stay long, but they actually put you to sleep every time, didn't they?
Yeah.
Did anybody have natural childbirth? Well, now what about when they had them at home?
I guess they did when they had them at home, but
They had
I
the
think
natural.
they usually carried something. Ether was rather easy to give them. They just had to put it on a cloth and had them to breathe it.
So there were times when people had them at home that put them to
that
sleep.
they did were able. But see, ether wasn't discovered till around 1860 or something. I
So
think.
that was a
wasn't it?
new thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the guy that discovered ether, wasn't he Crawford W. Long? And that was the hospital you had me in. I think he was one that discovered it. Did you ever witness a baby being born, or hear the mama screaming, or in another room while there was a baby being born?
And I was asleep when all of mine were born. I didn't know anything.
They had them in the
about
night?
Huh?
Oh, you were
were
asleep.
asleep, yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant when Nanny Burch had hers. But yeah. Do you remember when Joyce was born?
No, she was born in the hospital. She was a C-section.
She was a C-section. Okay.
Paul and Aunt Claire and all them was so sweet.
You know more about when the father died. His Papa Stucky's father died than I do from reading that history. But didn't lightning strike him with a mute when he was plowing or something?
Papa
Stucky.
I thought that was
Daddy.
Nanny Stucky's daddy.
Maybe it was.
Yeah, she told me one time that her father got, but then she also had a father that was in the Civil War.
That was
he the one that was struck by lightning?
Because he lived a long, long
Well, maybe
time
it was
after that.
Papa Stucky. Do you remember Harriet?
Oh, no, that's
It'd be better not to put it in there if we don't know
I will.
it.
I'll cut it out. Well, just tell us something about Daddy's father. We know he died young by today's standards with a brain tumor, but do you remember anything about his background, the family he came from, or how he and Nanny Stucky met, or any of that? You don't know. Well, you just said that he was from a large family and they were poor.
Well, I just knew that from after he got older that they would say so and so was his brother, and so you know.
And wasn't he real strict and stern with Daddy?
Like Leona, that worked in the dentist office, is still living. She was the oldest brother's child.
Okay.
And she's real polished and nice looking, but she won't leave that place that she's got over there. And that son comes to Eastman and stays with her for weeks at a time. He has a trailer, and he's had that trailer there parked on her farm for a long time. And he's married to this woman. They live in North Carolina, and she does horses. Shows horses or something, and is real involved with the horses. So I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah. Well, do you remember when you and Daddy were dating and you and Daddy got married, what your impressions were of Papa Stucky and Nanny Stucky? What kind of people they were, and were they well thought of? Did Papa Stucky drink? Did he have an alcohol problem, or?
Well, he had one, but he quit drinking early in life.
That's good.
I hate to put anything derogatory on the thing, afraid that Margie or some of them will hear it and they won't.
Yeah, I'll cut this out, so don't worry about it.
Well,
So-
it hadn't got a light on.